Hello, I'm Father Kenneth Metz, a priest at All Souls Church in Sanford, Florida. As part of this series on the major feasts of the church year, we've been looking at the Feast of the Body and Blood of Christ, also known as Corpus Christi. In this video, we will examine the real presence of Jesus as it is broadly understood in Christianity. In August 2019, the Pew Research Center released the results of a survey of nearly 11,000 United States adults seeking the level of their knowledge about Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, and Hinduism. Of these, 1,835 identified themselves as Catholics. The survey results showed a pervasive ignorance of teachings of their own or other religions. The average U.S. adult correctly answered fewer than half of the 32 fact-based, multiple-choice questions about topics related to religion. Now, one of the questions asked in the survey concerned the Catholic belief in the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist. And this is what the survey found among the 1,800 Catholics. 31% agreed with the statement that during Catholic Mass, the bread and wine actually become the body and blood of Christ. 69% chose the statement that the bread and wine are symbols of the body and blood of Christ. Only 28% believed in the Catholic teaching of Transubstantiation. Among weekly churchgoers, that's people who went to Mass on Sunday, 63% believed in Transubstantiation, but 32% did not. Now, this Pew report sent shockwaves throughout our church. Some Catholic pundits railed loudly against what they saw as the low level of religious knowledge among Catholics today. Another said that, quote, "The great divide today is no longer between Protestant and Catholic, but between those who believe in a revealed religion and those who believe it is all just a symbol." Well, Mark Gray of the Center for Research in the Apostolate, known as CARA, a leading Catholic research organization, questioned the results, saying that the percentages were too far different than results found in other studies. He referred specifically to a 2011 study which said that 63% of Catholics believe in the real presence. Father Thomas Daly of the Catholic Leadership Institute also questioned the results. Having surveyed over 131,000 Catholics over the past few years, he found that 72% strongly agreed with the statement, "I personally believe the Eucharist is really the body and blood of Christ." He also found that another 19% agreed with that, but not so strongly. So, how can we make sense of the discrepancy between these studies? Well, one factor to consider whenever you're looking at any research is, what's their sample size? Now, the Pew sample size was much smaller, but more random compared to the other studies. Whereas the other studies, even though they were larger, but they may have been composed of more faithful Catholics. On the basis of sample size, I would not say which one was more representative of U.S. Catholics than the other. CARA is researching this further right now using a larger sample size. But more importantly, we should look at the wording of the questions or statements used in the surveys. The question asked in the Pew Research poll referred to the actual presence of Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament, in the bread and wine, compared to the bread and wine being just symbols of that presence. Dr. Gray from Kara theorized that asking about Christ's presence in the Eucharist using the word real rather than actual would have yielded different results, since actual, in common speech, tends to mean factually present and proven by empirical observation. Now, in this ordinary sense, Catholics do not believe Jesus is actually present in the Eucharist. For example, you don't take the Eucharistic host and put it under a microscope and see cellular flesh. Unless, of course, there is a miracle, as has been noted in Catholic Church history. But that's content for another whole series of videos. Nevertheless, Catholics do believe Jesus is really present in the Eucharist. Well then, what do Catholics mean by real presence? If you went out to this internet and Googled the meaning of real presence and transubstantiation, it's quite an adventure. When I looked closely at what was being reported, I found many different understandings of the words themselves. In fact, the first results in my searches were arguments against the Catholic understanding of the real presence, especially the Catholic belief in transubstantiation. Now, many argued that such beliefs made no sense for a scientific mind, that they were using philosophical expressions from 1,000 years ago, well, maybe 800 years ago. But when digging into what different Christian groups meant when they used the word or the phrase real presence, we find a lot of different meanings. For example, these are what I found. I feel closer to Jesus at the Lord's Supper. When we gather together, the presence of the Lord is real among us, recalling the words of Jesus, when 2 or 3 are gathered together, I am in your midst. There's a real sense in which Christ is present as the church gathers, for the church too is the body of Christ. In his 1965 encyclical Mysterium Fidei, Pope Paul VI affirmed the various ways that Christians might define real presence. In his list, in the encyclical, he says that Christ is really present in the church when she prays. He is also present when she performs acts of mercy. Christ is present in the church as she struggles to perfection. He is really present when the church governs the people of God. And Christ is present in the preaching of the gospel, and he is present in the church as the church faithfully celebrates the Eucharist. Well, so far so good. Pope Paul's list sounds like a lot of the lists made by others. But then he goes on to say that the Eucharistic presence of the body and blood of Christ is different from these other forms of Christ's presence. This is what he wrote. This is important to know. This presence is called real, not to exclude the idea that the others are real too, but rather to indicate a presence par excellence, because it is substantial, and through it, Christ becomes wholly present and entire God and man. And he goes on to say then, so it would be wrong for anyone to try to explain this manner of presence by dreaming up a so-called pneumatic, which means spiritual nature of the glorious body of Christ that would be present everywhere, or for anyone to limit it to symbolism, as if this most sacred sacrament were to consist in nothing more than an efficacious sign of the spiritual presence of Christ and of his intimate union with the faithful, the members of his body. Now, if the real presence is not an efficacious sign, and it's not merely a symbol, what is it? And the way that the Catholic Church believes in the real presence is called transubstantiation. Now, in my next bit, in this series, I'm going to look at what the Catholic Church means by transubstantiation. So goodbye for now. Until next time, check out our website at www.allsoulsanford.org. Like us on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Have a great day.